I want to tell you something I have never fully said out loud before. 3 years ago, I was sitting in my car in a parking lot outside a grocery store. Engine off, groceries in the back seat, and I just sat there for 40 minutes because I didn't want to go home, not because I was tired, not because I had somewhere else to be, because I was afraid of the silence that would greet me when I walked through that door. That specific silence, the kind that isn't really silence at all. It's loaded. It has weight. It presses against your chest and reminds you that the person sitting 10 feet away from you might as well be living in a different country. I had been with my partner for 6 years at that point. We had built a life together, a home, shared friends, inside jokes that nobody else would understand. And somewhere between year 3 and year 5, something shifted, something I couldn't name at the time, something I kept telling myself wasn't real. Because from the outside, we looked completely fine that we went to dinner. We laughed at parties. We posted photos that got hundreds of likes. And I remember looking at those photos sometimes and genuinely wondering how two people who looked that happy in a picture could feel that far apart in real life, that I told myself it was a phase. I told myself every couple goes through rough patches. I told myself I was being dramatic, too sensitive, too needy. I told myself that what I was feeling was just the normal settling that happens. When the honeymoon period ends, that I was wrong. What I didn't know, what nobody had ever told me, and what I desperately wish someone had, is that what I was experiencing wasn't just a rough patch. It was a pattern, a specific, recognizable, deeply dangerous pattern that relationship experts and therapists have studied for decades. And the terrifying part? Every single sign was right there in front of me for over a year before I understood what I was looking at. By the time I finally understood it, we had already done damage that took years to repair. For some couples I know personally, that damage was permanent. And here's what haunts me most when I think back to that parking lot, to those 40 minutes sitting alone in my car and not want to go home. I wasn't ignoring the signs because I didn't care. I was ignoring them because I didn't know they were signs. I thought the things my partner was doing, and honestly, the things I was doing too, were just normal relationship friction. Just life. Just what love looks like after the early glow fades. They were not normal. And if I had known then what I know now, I believe with everything in me that we could have saved ourselves from at least 2 years of pain. That is why I am making this video. Because if you're watching this right now, something brought you here. Maybe it was the title. Maybe it was a feeling you have been carrying around for weeks or months that you haven't been able to put into words yet. Maybe you're sitting in your own version of that parking lot. Not literally, but emotionally, and you're trying to figure out whether what you're feeling is real or whether you're just overreacting. That I need you to hear this clearly. You're not overreacting. What I'm going to share with you today are 5 specific warning signs. 5 things your partner may be doing right now that research, therapists, and real relationship data tell us are not just red flags. They are indicators that your relationship is already under serious threat. Not might be, not could be, already is. These are not things that fix themselves. They're not things that get better with time alone. But they're things that if you catch them now and respond the right way, can absolutely be turned around. Stay with me, because the next few minutes could genuinely change the direction of your relationship and possibly your life. Now, before I walk you through these 5 warning signs, I need to take 60 seconds to tell you why you should listen to me. Because the internet is full of relationship advice, and most of it is either painfully generic, emotionally manipulative, or written by someone who has never sat across from a couple in crisis and watched a real relationship unravel in real time. Let me be honest with you about who I am and where this comes from. I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to pretend to be one. What I am is someone who became obsessed, and I mean genuinely, almost unhealthily obsessed, with understanding why relationships fail. Not from a detached, academic place. From a deeply personal one. After what happened in my own relationship, I spent the better part of 2 years consuming every credible piece of research I could find on relationship psychology. I read the published studies. I went back to school and completed a certification in relationship coaching. I interviewed therapists, marriage counselors, and divorce attorneys. I spoke with couples who had been together for 30 and 40 years and asked them point blank what almost broke them and what saved them. And I spoke with people whose relationships didn't survive, people who were generous enough to sit with me and walk through exactly where things went wrong. And when they first knew something was broken down, I also started working with couples directly. First, just a few people from my own network who knew what I had been through and asked for help. Then more. Then more after that. Over the past several years, I have worked with or studied the situations of over 300 couples across different ages, backgrounds, relationship lengths, and circumstances. Couples who had been together 2 years and couples who had been together 22. Couples with children and couples without. Couples who were engaged, married, cohabiting, and long distance. And here is what is both remarkable and deeply sobering about that experience. The patterns repeat. Across all of those different people, different ages, different backgrounds, the same warning signs appear again and again and again, with striking consistency, which tells us something critically important. Relationship danger doesn't usually arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up one morning as a dramatic scene or a single devastating event. Most of the time, it moves quietly. It moves slowly. It hides inside behaviors that individually seem small, even understandable, but together form a picture that any trained eye would immediately recognize as serious. This is exactly what the research confirms. Dr. John Gottman, who is arguably the most respected relationship researcher alive today, spent over 4 decades studying couples at what became known as the Love Lab at the University of Washington. His team would bring couples into an apartment setting, observe them interacting for as little as a single weekend, and measure everything: facial expressions, tone of voice, physiological responses, word choices, conflict patterns. The results were extraordinary. Gottman's team was able to predict with over 90% accuracy which couples would divorce, sometimes within just a few hours of observation. Not based on how often couples fought, not based on how different their personalities were, but based on specific, measurable behavioral patterns that appeared consistently in relationships heading toward collapse. What I'm going to share with you today draws directly from that research, from Gottman's work, from the work of Dr. Sue Johnson, who developed emotionally focused therapy, from attachment theory research pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and from the frontline observations of the therapists and counselors I have spoken with extensively. This is not guesswork. This is not my opinion. These are patterns that have been studied, documented, and verified across thousands of couples over decades of serious research. And here's the part that I want you to hold on to as we go through this together. Knowing these patterns changes everything. Because the research also shows, clearly and consistently, that couples who learn to identify these warning signs early and respond to them with the right approach have dramatically better outcomes. Dramatically. We're not talking about marginal improvements. We're talking about the difference between a relationship that slowly collapses under unrecognized pressure and one that comes back stronger, more honest, and more deeply connected than it was before the warning signs appeared. I have seen that happen with my own eyes. With couples who came to me convinced their relationship was already over. Couples who had been sleeping in separate rooms for months. Couples who had stopped having real conversations years ago and had quietly settled into a polite, functional coldness that looked like stability but felt like grief. Some of those couples are still together today and describe their relationship now as the best it has ever been. That is not magic. That is not luck. That is what happens when people stop dismissing the warning signs and start responding to them with clarity and intention. Which brings me to the most important thing I want to say before we get into the 5 signs themselves. If you're watching this and something in your gut already told you before you click play that something is wrong, trust that feeling. Not to panic, not to catastrophize, but trust it enough to take it seriously. Because one of the most consistent things I have heard from people whose relationships failed is some version of the same sentence. I knew something was wrong long before I admitted it to myself. The human instinct for emotional safety in a relationship is remarkably accurate. We feel the shift before we can name it. We feel the distance before we can measure it. We feel the danger before we have the language for it. What this video is going to do is give you that language. Be why the end of what I am about to share with you. You'll be able to look at your own relationship with clear eyes and identify whether these 5 warning signs are present. You will understand not just what each sign looks like on the surface, but why it is dangerous at a deeper level. What it signals about the emotional architecture of your relationship and where it leads if left unaddressed. And critically, I'm not going to leave you sitting with a list of problems and no direction. For each warning sign, I'm going to tell you what the research-backed response looks like. Because identifying the danger is only half the work. Knowing what to do next is what actually saves a relationship. All right, let's get into it. Here are the 5 warning signs that tell us, clearly, reliably, and with the backing of decades of research, that your relationship is already in serious danger. Warning sign number 1. Contempt has entered your communication. There's a difference between anger and contempt, and that difference is everything. Anger says, I am frustrated with something you did. Contempt says, I am better than you, and I think you are beneath me. Anger is actually healthy in a relationship. It means you still care enough to react. It means the issue matters to you. Couples who never get angry at each other are not necessarily healthier. Sometimes they have simply stopped investing enough to feel anything at all. Contempt is different. Contempt is what Gottman identified as the single most destructive force in any relationship. In his research, it is the #1 predictor of divorce. More reliable than infidelity, more reliable than financial stress, more reliable than incompatibility of personality. When contempt enters a relationship regularly, the odds of that relationship surviving long-term drop dramatically. What does contempt actually look like in real life? Because most people picture contempt as something dramatic and obvious. It is not. Contempt looks like eye rolling during an argument. It looks like a sarcastic smirk when your partner shares an opinion. It sounds like mockery dressed up as a joke, the kind that lands and leaves a small bruise before the conversation moves on. It sounds like your partner speaking to you in a tone they would never use with a colleague or a stranger. It shows up in the way someone sighs when you start talking. In this way, they dismiss your concerns with a single word before you have finished your sentence. If your partner regularly makes you feel stupid, small, or ridiculous for what you think, feel, or believe, that is contempt. And contempt, if it has taken root in your relationship, is a warning sign that requires immediate and serious attention. Warning sign number 2. Stonewalling has become a pattern. Every couple goes quiet sometimes. Needing space during a heated moment is not a warning sign. Needing time to process before responding is not a warning sign. Those are actually healthy impulses. Stonewalling is something else entirely. Stonewalling is when one partner completely shuts down during conflict. Not temporarily, not to regroup, but as a habitual, repeated response to emotional difficulty. It is the wall that goes up and stays up. It is the sudden monosyllabic answer, the blank expression, the physical withdrawal, leaving the room, picking up a phone, turning on the television, in the middle of a conversation that still has something important left unsaid. Gottman's research found that stonewalling typically develops in response to what he calls flooding, a state of emotional overwhelm where the nervous system essentially goes into shutdown mode. The person stonewalling is not always doing it deliberately or maliciously, but the effect on the relationship is the same regardless of the intention. Because here is what stonewalling communicates to the partner on the receiving end, whether it means to or not. Your feelings are not worth my engagement. This conversation is not worth my presence. You're not worth the discomfort of showing up right now. Over time, the partner being stonewalled stops bringing things up. They stop reaching out during conflict. They start swallowing concerns and emotions because they have learned through repeated experience that reaching out leads to a wall. In a relationship where one person has stopped reaching out is a relationship that is slowly going dark. If stonewalling is a regular feature of how your partner handles conflict, not an occasional response, but a consistent one, your relationship is carrying a serious structural problem that will not resolve on its own. Warning sign number 3. Repair attempts are being ignored or rejected. This one is less well known than the others, but it is arguably one of the most telling. A repair attempt is any action, verbal or nonverbal, that one partner makes during or after a conflict to de-escalate tension, restore connection, or signal a willingness to come back toward each other. It might be a touch on the arm mid-argument, a small joke to break the tension, a quiet, "I'm sorry," before the dust has fully settled, a text the morning after a fight that says nothing more than, "I love you," a gentle look across the room that says we are okay. Healthy couples make repair attempts constantly, and Critically, healthy couples receive them. They recognize the signal, even when they're still hurt or still frustrated, and they respond to it. They let the hand on the arm mean something. They let the joke land. In relationships heading towards serious danger, repair attempts start getting rejected. Not always consciously. Sometimes the partner receiving the attempt is so depleted, so guarded, or so deeply hurt that they simply cannot open the door when someone knocks, even when part of them wants to. They deflect the humor. They pull away from the touch. They leave the text on. Read. When repair attempts consistently fail, when the bridge keeps getting offered and keeps getting refused, both partners eventually stop building bridges. And a relationship with no functioning repair system is one failed argument away from a fracture that cannot be walked back. Pay attention to whether repair attempts are happening in your relationship, and pay attention to what happens when they do. Warning sign number 4. The positive to negative ratio has collapsed. Gottman's research produced one of the most specific and striking findings in the entire field of relationship science. Stable, happy couples maintain a ratio of roughly 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. 5 to 1. It became known as the magic ratio. This does not mean couples need to be relentlessly cheerful or avoid all conflict. It means that in the overall emotional climate of the relationship, across conversations, gestures, moments of connection, small daily exchanges, the warmth, humor, affection, curiosity, and appreciation need to significantly outweigh the criticism, frustration, distance, and disappointment. When that ratio collapses, when the negative starts to crowd out the positive, when most interactions carry a charge of tension or indifference, when it has been weeks since you genuinely laughed together or touched each other without agenda, the emotional bank account of the relationship is running on empty. Think honestly about the last 2 weeks in your relationship. Not the highlight moments, the ordinary ones, the mornings, the meals, the conversations about nothing in particular, the brief exchanges as you pass each other in the hallway of your shared life. What is the emotional temperature of those moments? Are they warm or cold, connected or distant? Do they leave you feeling slightly more full or slightly more hollow? If the honest answer is that most ordinary moments in your relationship now carry a low-grade tension, a quiet emptiness, or a sense of two people coexisting rather than genuinely connecting, the ratio has shifted. And that shift matters more than most people realize. Warning sign number 5. You have started telling yourself a new story about your partner. This last warning sign is the most subtle, and in many ways the most dangerous of all. Early in a relationship, we tend to tell generous stories about our partners. When they do something that hurts or frustrates us, we reach for the charitable explanation. They must be stressed. They didn't mean it like that. That's just how they show love. They are doing their best. This is not naivety. This is the foundation of trust. It is what allows two imperfect people to build something lasting together. But in relationships under serious stress, something begins to shift in the internal narrative. The same behavior that once received a generous interpretation starts receiving a harsh one. The partner who used to be stressed is now selfish. The one who used to be independent is now emotionally unavailable. The one who used to be passionate is now unstable. Gottman calls this the development of negative sentiment override, a state in which the accumulated weight of unresolved hurt and disappointment begins to color how we interpret everything our partner does. Even neutral behaviors start being read as hostile. A forgotten errand becomes evidence of not caring. A quiet evening becomes proof of emotional withdrawal. A misunderstood tone becomes confirmation of disrespect. When you catch yourself consistently assuming the worst about your partner's motivations, when your internal story about who they are has fundamentally shifted from ally to adversary, your relationship is in serious danger. Not because the relationship is necessarily beyond saving, but because once that internal story fully hardens, changing it requires deliberate, sustained effort that most couples never make simply because they never realized the story had changed. Ask yourself honestly, when your partner does something that bothers you today, what is the first story you tell yourself about why they did it? That answer will tell you a great deal about where your relationship actually stands. All right, you now know the 5 warning signs. And if you have been genuinely honest with yourself while Listening, you're probably sitting with a clearer and maybe more uncomfortable picture of your relationship than you had when you clicked play.so. Before we move to what you should do next, I want to give you something extra. Something most relationship content never touches because it sounds almost too quiet to be powerful. But in all of my research, in all of my conversations with therapists and long-term couples, and people who pulled their relationships back from the absolute edge, this one thing came up more consistently than almost anything else. I call it the invisible conversation technique. And I want to explain exactly where it comes from before I tell you how to use it. Because once you understand the science behind it, you will never look at your relationship's daily small moments the same way again. The research nobody talks about in the early 2000s. Gottman and his team made a discovery that quietly shifted everything they thought they understood about what separates couples who stay. Deeply connected from couples who slowly drift apart, they had been focused, as most researchers were, on the big moments. The arguments, the crises, the major turning points. But what they found when they studied couples in the ordinary texture of daily life was something far more subtle and far more consequential. They discovered what they called bids for connection, that a bid for connection is any small attempt, verbal or nonverbal, that one partner makes to engage the other, to establish even a momentary thread of contact. It can be as tiny as pointing out a bird through the window, mentioning something funny that happened at work, sighing audibly, asking a throwaway question about nothing in particular, reaching out a foot under the table and letting it rest against their leg. These moments are so small that most people do not consciously register them as anything meaningful. They feel like noise, background texture, the unremarkable static of shared daily life. But Gottman's research revealed that they are not noisy at all. They are, in fact, the primary architecture of emotional intimacy. The invisible conversation that runs underneath every relationship. Louder and more consequential than any argument you will ever have. Because every single bid for connection requires a response. And that response falls into one of three categories. You can turn toward, acknowledge the bid, engage with it, meet the moment however briefly. You can turn away, ignore it, miss it, let it pass without response, or you can turn against, respond with irritation, dismissal, or hostility. Here is what the data showed. Couples who were still together and describing themselves as happy 6 years after being studied had turned toward each other's bids. Approximately 86% of the time during ordinary daily interactions. Couples who had divorced or separated in that same period had turned toward each other only 33% of the time. Not during arguments. Not during important conversations. During the invisible, unremarkable, forgettable, small moments of everyday life. The ordinary moments with a relationship. The ordinary moments were everything. How to use the invisible conversation technique is a deliberate, structured practice built around this research. It has two parts, and unlike most relationship advice, it requires almost no time and no difficult conversation to begin. Part 1. The bid audit for the next 7 days. I want you to do one thing differently. Every time your partner makes any kind of bid for connection, however small, however easy to miss, I want you to consciously notice it. You do not need to respond differently yet. You do not need to change anything yet. Just notice. Notice how many times a day they reach toward you in small ways. Notice how many of those reaches you currently meet, miss, or deflect. Notice the ones that cost you nothing to meet, but that you have been letting pass without thinking about it. Most people who do this audit for even 2 or 3 days report the same thing. Genuine shock at how many bids their partner makes that they were completely unaware of, and genuine discomfort when they begin to see how often those bids have been quietly going unanswered. This matters because here's the painful truth about what happens to a person whose bids for connection are consistently ignored or rejected by their partner. They stop making them. Slowly, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, they stop reaching out. They protect themselves from the small, repeated sting of reaching toward someone and finding nothing there. And a partner who has stopped making bids is a partner who has begun emotionally withdrawing from the relationship, often long before either person has consciously identified that anything is wrong. The bid audit shows you exactly where your relationship currently stands in real, concrete, daily terms. Not based on how you feel in theory, based on what is actually happening between you every single day. Part 2. The intentional turn. Once you have done the audit for several days and you have a clearer sense of the bids you have been missing, the second part is simple. Not easy, but simple. Pick 3 bids per day that you would previously have let pass and turn toward them. Deliberately, consciously, fully. Not 3 grand gestures. Not 3 meaningful conversations. 3 small turns. 3 moments where you put down what you're doing, look up, and meet your partner in the tiny moment they're offering you. The bird they pointed at, you look at it and say something genuine about it. The story they started telling about their day. You put the phone down and actually listen to how it ends. The quiet sigh, you ask gently and without pressure what is on their mind. 3 turns per day. That is it. What happens neurologically when someone's bids begin being consistently met after a period of being consistently missed is striking. The emotional temperature of the relationship begins to shift, not because any of the larger problems have been solved, but because the person who had been quietly withdrawing begins to feel something they may not have felt in a long time. That reaching out toward their partner is safe again. That the hand they extend will find something to hold. And a partner who feels safe reaching out is a partner who stays in the relationship emotionally, who brings their real thoughts and feelings into the shared space instead of keeping them private, who fights for the relationship instead of quietly resigning from it. Gottman's team found that couples who consciously increased their rate of turning toward each other during ordinary moments showed measurable improvements in relationship satisfaction within weeks, without any other intervention, without a single difficult conversation, without resolving a single outstanding conflict. Just 3 intentional turns per day. Begin the audit tomorrow morning. Not next week. Tomorrow. Pay attention to how your partner reaches toward you before lunch, and you will already have more information about the current state of your relationship than most couples gather in a year. I want to take a moment before we close to acknowledge something that if you made it this far, through the warning signs, through the research, through everything we have covered together today, it tells me something important about you. It tells me you're not someone who is willing to just let things slide. You are not someone who is going to pretend everything is fine when something inside you is quietly telling you it is not. You care about your relationship enough to sit with uncomfortable truths and still keep listening. That matters more than you know. Because the single biggest predictor of whether a relationship survives difficulty is not compatibility. It is not communication skills. It is not even love, as strange as that sounds. It is whether both people are willing to take the warning signs seriously before they become permanent damage. You just took that step. Give yourself credit for that. Now here is what I need you to do next. And I mean right now, not tomorrow, not after the next argument, not when things feel more stable. Right now, while this is still fresh. First, leave a comment below this video with one word that describes how your relationship feels today. Not how you want it to feel. How it actually feels right now in this moment. One word. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to justify it. Just name it honestly in the comments. You will be surprised what it feels like to. Simply name it out loud, even in writing, even anonymously, even to strangers. And you will be surprised how many people respond with the exact same word. You're not as alone in this as it feels right now. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You already know who that person is. It came to mind while you were watching. Maybe it is a friend who has been describing their relationship in ways that worried you. Maybe it is a family member who keeps making excuses for a partner whose behavior you recognize in what we covered today. Send it to them quietly, without pressure, without a long explanation. Just send it. It might be the most important thing anyone sends them this year. Third, subscribe and hit the notification bell because what we covered today is only the beginning. In the coming videos, I'm going to go deeper into each of these warning signs individually. I'm going to walk through exactly what the repair process looks like when contempt has taken root. I'm going to share what the research says about whether stonewalling can truly be reversed and under what conditions. I'm going to talk about what to do when you are the only one in your relationship who is willing to do the work. These are the conversations most relationship content never has. We're going to have them here. Your relationship brought you to this video for a reason. Do not ignore that.